Welcome in to the 48 Minutes podcast on Believe, presented by BetOnline. I'm Ross Geiger, the former NBA video coordinator, having spent time with the Bucks, Suns, and Knicks. And I'm joined alongside Bruce Bernstein, our four-time Emmy Award winner, who spent more than 3 decades at ESPN producing NBA shows, SportsCenter, and soaking up knowledge from the best hoop analysts in the business. We're also with two-time Emmy Award winner Michael Worldby Freer, who is a senior writer at Stat Factor, specializing in writing advanced statistical NBA reports for various announcers across the league. And tonight, we're thrilled to be joined by Joe Doerrer of StrictlyBball, as he makes his return to the show to be sure we're all prepared for the NBA draft that takes place later on this week. This is episode number 110, the Paul Pierce episode, as the truth is arguably the best 10th overall pick ever. That very wise selection was, of course, made by the Boston Celtics, and Pierce was sure to be in Beantown last Friday to take part in the championship parade. Before we give tonight's guest a proper introduction, just a quick reminder, BetOnline is your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. From baseball, golf, soccer, right up to all the top fights in UFC, MMA, and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, for a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. Now for our guest, Joe Doerrer. He is the co-founder of StrictlyBball, and to put it simply, he continues to be one of the rising stars in the basketball media world, with over 2.5 million followers on TikTok. And if you're a hoops junkie, you've likely already following his content, or at the very least have seen some of his footage go viral, as he covers basketball at quite literally every level of the game. Joe attends many of the major high school events. He's partnered with Overtime Elite to cover their entire season of play. He's partnered with the Big Ten to create storytelling videos around both the men's and women's Big Ten tournaments. And he also has a partnership with the NBA to do short-form storytelling around the NBA season and the draft. This past season, Joe had the opportunity to interview his hometown Minnesota Timberwolves at Media Day, and just recently interviewed many of this year's top draft prospects at the NBA Combine, and is also set to be at the NBA Draft in New York for this week's main event. Joe, welcome back to 48 Minutes, and thanks for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to join us.
Ross, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm excited to do this. This is an annual thing now. I mean, right before the draft, I look forward to coming on this podcast. So I'm really excited to talk some NBA draft, maybe touch on a little Timberwolves. I mean, I'm still not over the incredible run that we had. And yeah, I'm just excited to be here.
Well, we're going to get to those young dudes in just a minute. But since you mentioned the Wolves, let's start with them. So what is your reaction to this year's really impressive Timberwolves season? And were there any preseason vibes that you had that stood out to you when you were attending the team's media day back in, September?
Yeah, I mean, the season, like you said, really goes all the way back to that media day when we had the opportunity to basically sit down with every player, and we asked them some questions about the team, and we asked them, at that time, it seems like forever ago, but we were previewing the in-season tournament. But yeah, I mean, the vibes were great back then. You could tell right away with all the guys. And I think some people are skeptical after last season, about the Wolves basically rolling out the same team that was an 8 seed the year before. And the Towns and Gobert combination was not smooth, to put it lightly. But now, I mean, we came into the season, and I think it was about week 2, we had a matchup against the Nuggets and the Celtics in the same week. And we won both those games, and we were just sailing after that. And we were in the 1 seed for most of the season. And obviously it was because of that defense anchored by Gobert. And then we get into the playoffs, and I think the entire city of Minneapolis, the entire state of Minnesota just had a fun ride. And it culminated with that Game 7 win over the Nuggets. It was absolutely incredible. Just seeing the entire city come together. Everyone was outside watching these games at breweries and watch parties. And we kind of ran out of gas in that Maverick series, but I don't like to let that take away from the run that we had. And you just got to sit back and realize that as Timberwolves fans, your expectations are not too high. And we've only made it out of the first round once before in franchise history. So I'm happy with how the season went.
Now, having covered the Timberwolves during media day, throughout the season, and throughout the playoffs, what is the always entertaining Anthony Edwards like off the court and behind the scenes? What's some story or two that you have from your time covering him?
Yeah, we've myself and then my partner Nolan, we've met him twice, but media day was one of those times, and obviously, as fans, we're a little bit nervous to meet like the stars of our favorite team. And he gets in there. He was one of the last guys to go. He's gone through a whole gauntlet of media throughout the day. So we're like, oh man, he's just kind of going to be a little tired, whatever. And he came in and he was a little quiet, and we were like, we got to get him out of his shell. And then one of our questions was a trivia about his own career. And he absolutely loved that part of the interview. We were asking him about his debut game, and we were asking about just like his career high. As soon as we got into this, he got competitive and he was cracking jokes. He was kind of like just became the Anthony Edwards that is clearly who he is with the people that he knows well. I think it just takes some time to come out of his shell. And then the funniest part is we knew that there's these hot fries, which is his favorite snack. You guys might have heard that before, but we brought him a bag. And after we did the interview, we gave it to him. And we were like, we knew this is your favorite snack because we wanted to kind of make something. Maybe he'd remember us if we did that. And he, I kid you not, was so grateful. He was like, I haven't eaten in 4 hours. I've been doing interviews. Like, thank you guys so much for this bag of hot fries. I'm so hungry. And just, it was hilarious to see. Like, I thought he might have just like put it to the side and be like, oh, thanks. But he was like genuinely so thankful. That's our one Anthony Edwards story. But as soon as we kind of saw that as soon as he came out of his shell, it was clear this is like one of the funniest guys I've ever met.
Hey, listen, man, small acts of kindness go a long way. That really does make an impression with people. I want to ask you one quick question about the Wolves. They're sitting with the number 27 spot in the first round. Against Dallas, their perimeter defense was sort of exposed a little bit by the closers in Dallas. So what kind of help are the Wolves maybe considering if they keep that number 27 pick?
I think that there was obviously some issues with the defense in that Maverick series, but I don't think the Wolves' issues are defensively. I think there might have been some schematic things that we would have done differently in that series if we were to do it over again. But honestly, I think what we could use is, number one, a backup point guard. Mike Conley can't play 82 games and 4 rounds at this point in his career. And he played very well for us, but we're going to need somebody to, number one, back him up. And then number two, potentially, if everything goes right, take over the reins alongside Anthony Edwards in the backcourt once Conley decides to retire. So I think that's the number one priority. I think number two would maybe be kind of like a flamethrower off the bench, somebody who can really shoot the 3 ball. But a couple of guys I like is, number one, KJ Simpson from Colorado. He was one of the best players that actually played at the NBA Draft Combine because not many first-round picks really actually play. But he played, and he looked like the best player in all of the scrimmages. And he's a smaller guard. He's a 6-foot guard, but he's super quick. He can score on all 3 levels, and he's competitive, and I really like him. And then I guess the other one a lot of people are talking about is Tyler Kolek. If he ends up falling to the Wolves at 27 at Marquette, led that Marquette team to one of the best years in that program's history. And I think he really has a chance to be a can't-miss solid point guard. He's not going to be a superstar, I don't think, but he can be that guy to be a backup point guard and potentially be a solid starting point guard on a team that has some other stars like we do.
Now, Joe, since you do cover so many of the highly ranked high school games and players, along with some college games, I'm wondering if you could give us an estimate of how many of these draft prospects you've seen play live, whether that be from high school, college, or even the G League or overtime.
Yeah, so I was just looking at a mock draft, just kind of looking at that, and in the first round, I would say about 9 or 10 of the guys we watched before they played in college. So we watched guys like Modest Buzelis, Ron Holland, on the EYBL circuit. We watched Rob Dillingham at OTE. We actually watched Alex Sarr at OTE as well. Jacoby Walter, Carlton Carrington, Jared McCain. A lot of the one and done guys in this draft are guys that we watched when they were in high school. So it's really interesting to see how their stocks rise and fall from their high school days. Like a guy like Bub Carrington was actually outside the top 100 in high school. We watched him in a game in New York City where he was making a lot of shots, but he didn't really jump off to us in that game, and he really was a huge riser in college. And then a guy like Isaiah Collier, we loved in high school. I personally thought he was the best player in that high school class. I loved his playmaking, which I think we didn't see a lot of at USC, and just his ability to get downhill and put pressure on the rim. And he is now maybe going to be drafted in the 20s. But we really, our expertise in terms of seeing these guys in person comes with these one and done guys.
So given your knowledge on a lot of these guys, what's your overall take on this year's draft class? I mean, what can NBA fans realistically expect from the guys in this year's draft?
Yeah, I would say that it definitely doesn't have the top end talent. Like everyone's kind of talking about how this draft almost feels like it starts at like the average 5th or 6th pick. Like we're missing that 1, 2, 3 kind of guys that everyone's wanting to get up into that area to pick a guy who can change their franchise. And that might not be in this class. And I think people kind of got that feeling even when these guys were in high school. I remember when this class was in their senior year and going into their senior year, there was a number of different guys who held that number 1 spot in the high school rankings. Modest Buzelis was up there, Ron Holland, Isaiah Collier, Justin Edwards, who's now a guy that's projected to go in the 2nd round. All were in that range for the number 1. But I will say, I think that there's a lot of guys in this draft that can be really solid role players right away. I didn't watch a lot of these guys in high school, but the seniors, the juniors in college right now, guys like Tyler Kolek or, guys like Dalton Connect can step in and be contributors. Devin Carter being another one. So I think this is actually a really good draft for teams that already have their stars in place and are looking to add these complementary pieces to their team.
Now, given that you're in New York covering this draft, I'm kind of wondering your thoughts on the draft being split into 2 nights now, with the first round coming up on Wednesday and the second round coming up on Thursday. This is obviously something new for the NBA. So I was wondering what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah, it's interesting because and the second night of the draft is actually at 4 Eastern on Thursday. So I don't think they really expect many people to be watching around, except people may be watching for the Bronny James pick, but we might touch on that a little bit later. But it's I think the NBA is not too concerned with the second night being a big television event. I think the second night of the draft is more for the teams. I feel like I think the teams wanted more time to kind of move picks around and prepare for that, because the second round of the draft in previous years, it was like 2 minutes per pick. And I think people just felt rushed on the team side. I think that's the reason they're doing it. But it'll be interesting. I think that we'll see if people show up, if people watch the second night of the draft, if they can try to make that a whole nother interesting event. I think the actual interesting piece with it being 2 nights is that they invited 24 guys to the green room. And I think with how unpredictable this draft is set to be, there's going to be a few of those green room guys that end the entire night and they're not being selected. And will those guys come back for the second night? Will they just call it a week and just head home? I think it'll be interesting which one of those 24 guys, because there's going to be some guys that are surprise first round picks, and those green room guys might be sitting there at the end of the night.
You know, I worked on the draft for 15 seasons where I was in the arena, and the saddest thing in the world is the last guy sitting in the green room there. Everybody else has been drafted, and he's the guy sitting there kind of looking down, and it totally sucks for that guy. So hopefully there's not going to be any heartbreaking moments captured on live TV. But all right, so you attended the combine. There's, not really a clear-cut number 1 overall pick. So what's the feeling you're getting from both teams and prospects in terms of potential movement on draft night? Do you think there's going to be a lot of trades, or teams going to be jockeying around draft slots, or any surprising players selected much higher than most draft experts might be expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I always feel like there's more trade talk than actual trades on draft night. It always seems like it.
I agree.
It always seems like everyone's going to move. This pick is on the block, and then all of a sudden you're 10 picks in and there's no movement. I don't have a ton of inside sources, but from other people that do have inside sources that I've talked to, I think that Atlanta has a big decision to make. And I think that's a decision that goes far beyond just draft night. I think there's so many avenues where they could trade Trae Young. And in that case, maybe you do want to try to take a swing at a high upside guy. And then maybe they want to keep both Trae and DeJounte and take a guy that fits with those two to try to compete, like Donovan Clingan at number 1. And I don't really know, other than that, who's going to be trading picks. I think there's talk that maybe the Spurs try to package 8 and 4 if they have a guy that they think is going to go 1 that they really want to get. I think that would be the wrong choice. I think in a draft like this, having 2 swings is better than going after 1 guy, because the difference between 1 and 8 is very slim, and you might just get lucky with a guy at 8. So I don't really know who's going to be traded, but I think it's going to be interesting, like you said, about guys going in positions that you might not expect. Like, I don't know who that guy's going to be, but a guy like Bub Carrington, I think maybe a team really likes him and takes him top 10 when some people have him mocked closer to 20. I think Devin Carter could be another guy that is taken by a team who's like, all right, this is kind of a can't miss prospects. I don't know if we want to just take a swing on a guy when we know we have this guy that can be effective.
Now, before we reach break here, Joe, I'm glad you mentioned Bub Carrington. I know some of our listeners have been anxiously awaiting my Gigi Jackson pick for this year's draft class, and it's going to be Bub Carrington out of Pitt. I really just like his makeup, his size. I think just with some development time, he could be one of the standouts that's certainly going to outlive his draft. I think he's going to propel past wherever his draft value is. I think he's going to be one of the overperformers for where he's taken in this draft. And one quick fun fact on him, he's actually the second cousin to Rudy Gay. So he also has some family ties to the league. So I'd take an athlete like Rudy Gay's family on my team any day. So with that, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll come back with the second half. And we're back with the start of the second half. And Joe, in an effort to best utilize the time we have with you, we'd like to put a twist on one of our favorite segments with our guests called Word Association. So let's go ahead and call this Prospect Association. So we're going to give you an attribute, and you're going to tell us which player comes to mind. Sound cool?
Yeah. Okay. Let's do it.
All right. So I'll go ahead and start us off here. Superstar potential.
Superstar potential, which is a hot topic in a draft like this when there's no clear superstar. I'm going to go with Modest Buzelis. out of the G League Ignite. I think that going into the year, he was the projected number 1 pick, and he just didn't shoot the ball very well at Ignite. But he shot the ball well in high school, and I think at 6'10", with his ball handling ability and his athleticism, there's some opportunity that if he can knock down threes and tighten up his handle, he could be a pretty crazy big creator.
Okay, I'm going to go with best athlete.
Best athlete, I'm going to say Ron Holland. His teammate at Ignite. 6'8", can jump out of the gym. And I think he's also such a high motor player that it makes his athleticism jump off the screen even more. I'll say Ron Holland for that.
Joe, how about biggest competitor?
I did just talk about Ron Holland's competitiveness. But honestly, for this one, I'm going to say Devin Carter. He is a guard who, I don't know his exact height, 6'3", it says here, and he averaged 8 rebounds a game in college. And you don't average 8 rebounds a game as a guard unless you are a competitor. I think he could be the biggest competitor in this class.
All right, Joe, I'm going to test your knowledge here internationally. Best French prospect, since there's quite a few of them.
Wow. Okay. Honestly, I will say that I'm not as high on Alex Sarr as some people are. And I don't fully I mean, I understand the hype with Risa Shea. I always struggle with that one. Man. But I will say to me, it's probably Risa Shea as the best one over Sarr. Some people will bring in Tijan Salon into that conversation.
Yep.
I can't say I've watched too much film on him, so I don't want to pick him just off of not liking the other two as much. But I get where people are coming from with Risa Shea, because he's 6'9" and he theoretically can be a really, really good shooter and switchable defender. But I just don't know if he can do much off the dribble, and we'll see. I'm going to take him though.
Okay.
All right. How about basketball junkie?
So of the guys that I've met in this class, because you don't always know with some of these guys. Last year it was a men and Asar Thompson. I remember talking about them on this podcast. This year, it's Jared McCain. He, from what I remember talking to him, he was the first time we interviewed him. He was at the beginning of his junior year of high school, and we asked him if he has any guys that he likes to watch in the NBA when it comes to, and actually he was talking about watching film as a junior in high school. And he brought up Seth Curry right away.
Ooh, interesting.
And I remember thinking the fact that he said Seth Curry before Steph makes me think he's very much, number one, watching the NBA and in tune with the play styles of these guys. Also, he's very self-aware when it comes to his game. And you see a lot of guys try to be Steph when they're not. And he is truly great at coming off screens, knocking down threes. And I think he can be better than Seth Curry. But him saying that was really an eye-opener. And I remember he also said Fred VanVleet, in not for the shooting, but for the ability to be a smaller guard that can use his frame and footwork to be effective. And I was listening to a recent podcast with Kevin O'Connor, who interviewed him, and he talked about playing off 2 feet and how that's his biggest focus, and how Jalen Brunson is somebody that he watches now. And I just am so impressed by his self-awareness of his own game and his awareness of the rest of the league. I think he watches a ton of basketball, and I think that's what's going to make Jared McCain a really one of the more can't miss prospects when it comes to freshmen in this class.
Joe, how about a second round sleeper?
Okay. I would say my favorite one is somebody that I watched at the combine, and it's Nikola. How do you say it? Jurisic. Nikola Jurisic. He has played in the same program that produced Jokic and Jovic. So he's the third Nikola to come out of the program. And he's a big 6'5" guard that is a great passer like a lot of European players. And he's actually really athletic and can knock down shots. I think he's somebody that could be a pretty big steal if he puts it all together.
All right, Joe, I got one last one for you, and then we might have some rapid fire questions on some prospects. But I asked you best French prospect. How about best UConn Husky?
I'm going to take Stefan Castle.
Okay.
I'm going to take Castle on that one. I think it's him and Klingon are both going to be good pros. But Castle, if he actually really can turn into a point guard, because that's what he played in high school, I think he could be one of the best players in this class.
Hey, Joe, I wanted to ask you about, in my preview and the prospects and everything, Nikola Topic. Top 10 prospect, but recently was discovered he had a partially torn ACL. And I'm just curious your thoughts on him when he's fully healthy, and how much do you think that is going to impact his positioning in the draft?
I don't think it should impact his positioning too much, just because I feel like players are now recovering from injuries better than ever, and I don't think it's going to affect him long term. And if a team's not looking to draft a player that they want to help them compete this season, I think you should take him as if he was healthy or not. Don't knock him too much for that. I actually do really like him as a prospect for some teams, just because I think this class lacks a lot of good primary ball handler playmakers. I feel like there's less and less playmakers every year. I don't know. That might just be me, but I like the fact that he's a good playmaker. And for a team that's looking for somebody like that, he's the obvious number one guy in that archetype in this draft, in my opinion. So, yeah, I mean, the injury is really unfortunate for him. We won't be able to see him playing early on. But I think if that ends up actually tanking his stock, I think the team could get a steal with him.
Just a quick follow-up on him, because I mentioned obviously the injury or whatever, but that was the last of a few injuries he had this past season. Is there any concern among? I know an injury like that you can recover from, but he had an injury, kept him out for a good part of his season. Is there any concern about going forward with something? Because the numbers and his prospect ranking is really high if fully healthy, as you mentioned, as you said. I'm just, I'm wondering going forward, it wasn't just one injury. Obviously he had an injury, came back, injured himself again, and then was discovered to have this ACL issue.
I guess, I mean, that's a fair point. If teams really believe that he's more of an injury prone player, then of course they can, that could tank his stock. But I guess I don't have the answers to that. So there is probably people that in different teams that may have one opinion that would vary from another. Like I think there was when Michael Porter Jr. got drafted, there was some teams that said that they wouldn't take him if he was there in the second round because they didn't think he would ever even play a full season. And then the same was said kind of about Embiid, and who has had injury problems in his career. So, yeah, I mean, that's probably varies from team to team and medical staff on different teams.
Michael Porter is the guy I was thinking about when I was looking up his numbers and his nose. That was exactly the person I equated to his situation. So I'm glad you brought him up.
And the thing about Michael Porter is I think the injuries actually did derail his career in a way, because I think if the way he looked in high school, I mean, he moved way differently than he does now. And I think he stays healthy enough to play a lot of the time, but I don't think he's ever the same guy as he was pre-injuries.
Now, Joe, speaking of movement, before we hit the break here, I got to ask you about Zach Edey out of Purdue, 7'5". How do you think his game translates at the next level? Do you see him having success or really struggling to stick in the league?
If I were to make a bet on Edey, I would say I think he is going to be a good regular season player. And especially if he finds a spot where he can kind of be an anchor for a team's bench unit, where they can really go to him a lot when he's in the game, but not necessarily play him 35 minutes a night. Not that they're the same player, but kind of like a Naz Reid for the Wolves, where you bring him off the bench, and when he's in, he's looking to score. And he can kind of be like that big man, six man that is really effective on offense when he's in. And I think the worry for him that most people have, and I actually do have as well, is just how much certain guys get picked on in the postseason when it comes to mismatches and getting big men that can't necessarily guard a pick and roll 35 feet from the basket. And that's going to be a challenge for him. I think he tested better at the combine in terms of agility than most people thought. It was actually similar to Klingon. Actually a little bit better in every category than Klingon. But
wow,
numbers at the combine only mean so much. You got to actually watch it and see how he can guard a pick and roll and move in space. But I do think he's going to be effective, and he's going to have a value to a team. I do believe that. I don't think he's going to be struggling to break in like another player of the year, like Luka Garza on the Wolves, who was dominant in college, but is still working to get a spot on a team in the NBA. I think Edey's just different because he's 7'5", and that's just like, I saw one quote today that said, somebody was like, yeah, Edey's like Jonas Valanciunas, except 6 inches taller, which is a lot. I mean, that's a lot. I mean, you think of Valanciunas as like a mountain of a man, and then Edey's just 5-6 inches taller. I think it's going to be so intriguing. He's the most intriguing prospect in this draft to me for that reason, because I know some people who think he could be a top 5 player in this class, and there's definitely other people who think he should not be taken in the top 40. So it's just such a polarizing prospect that I can't think of another prospect who's had that range of like smart people who have this opinion of him.
Well, speaking of intriguing prospects, or at least intriguing names, we're going to take one more quick break and come back with some questions for you. And we're back here, and much like what might happen in this year's draft, I've got a last but certainly not least question for you, Joe. Bronny James. I know that you saw him play in high school, so I've got to ask you, what's your overall take on his game, and how does he project in the NBA given some time to develop?
It's a tough question. I mean, it's the hot topic of the draft. And I will say that because Bronny was such an intriguing player in high school for our followers, I watched almost every single game he played on the EYBL circuit going into his senior year of high school, because we were filming every time, and people loved seeing the videos of him. So I guess my opinion on Bronny is, as a player, he's a great defender. And people say that, but I truly believe he is one of the best guard defenders in this draft. He navigates screens really well. He moves his feet unlike some unlike many of the players I've seen, even good defenders, he is 6'2", so he's not going to be able to switch onto much bigger players. But guarding point guards who aren't oversized point guards, he's going to be one of the best. But I think that's really his one calling card in the NBA. It's his one NBA skill right now. And people talk about his shooting, and his shooting looks great and is smooth. He's just not making them at a high rate right now. And he's not making his free throws at the same rate that you would expect out of a knockdown shooter. So I think his shooting has a ways to go. And I think that his ball handling as a primary creator is so far away from being an NBA point guard. I almost wish he was 6'5" so we could call him a two guard, but he's just not. And as I was kind of struggling to find his pathway to being an NBA player, because I think he has some skills athletically and defensively that if given some time, he can be an NBA player. I truly do believe that. I finally heard the perfect comparison that I believe is a pathway for him, and it's another son of an NBA player, and that's Gary Payton III.
Ooh.
I think that
That'd be nice.
He is a defensive player. He's not a big guard. He can't actually shoot that well, but he wins on defense and hustle and making the right play. And those three things Bronny James can do. So I think it's going to have to take the right developmental system and some years. But I think Bronny actually can be an NBA player for a team, taking out the fact that he has the last name James. I do believe that, but he has a long ways to go.
Now, Joe, the rumors have been circulating for years that he's going to go to the Lakers. And all the mock drafts, have him going at 55 to the Lakers. But I'm wondering, would you be surprised if he were selected before 55 where the Lakers are?
I mean, I would be surprised. I would. The Suns obviously have been brought up, and those are the only two teams he's worked out for. I think that what's happening is that Rich Paul is kind of guiding him to where he wants him to go, and he really only wants him to go to the Lakers or the Suns. And I think teams, obviously, it's a draft. They can take whoever they want. So if they want to take Bronny, they can. I just think that teams wouldn't risk damaging their relationship with Rich Paul and Clutch by taking him when they didn't want to be taken. So I do think it's going to be the Suns or the Lakers, and I think more likely than not, it's going to be the Lakers because I just don't think you can justify taking Bronny in the first round. So I would expect him to go to the Lakers on draft night. But, I mean, we've seen in the NBA, you got to be ready for anything. And you never know. But hopefully, my hope for Bronny is that even if he's taken by the Lakers, they don't try to work him. They don't try to, maneuver him into the 12-man roster right away where he's trying to get minutes. And I think he needs to just go to the G League and, sure, get called up for a game and play some minutes with LeBron. We all want to see that. But go to the G League and play in that system and hopefully develop without the pressure of trying to play in the NBA as a 19-year-old.
The amount of pressure on Bronny being the son of LeBron is, I can't even imagine what that's going to be like, because no matter how great Bronny is, he won't be 1/100th of the player that LeBron is, because nobody is, really, if you think about it, certainly not at that age. But if he did go to a team other than the Lakers, let's say, do you think it's possible that there's going to be jealousy around him? People, perhaps teammates thinking, he's this rich kid. He's almost like a male version of Caitlin Clark, the way they've kind of been, bouncing her around a little bit. Do you think there's, and again, I know the W players have a different take on things than the NBA guys do, but could you foresee, again, if he's on the Lakers, Daddy's there to protect him. Nobody's going to mess with him if he's on the Lakers. But if he's on the Suns, could you see him getting, a little bit of a little extra sort of rookie hazing treatment? Or do you think that's kind of like, nah, you're tripping, Bruce?
No, I mean, that's a good point. I think that there is definitely a point there, because especially if Bronny is given opportunities that other guys at his level are not getting. Obviously, they're saying he's not going to sign a two-way deal. He's going to sign a standard NBA contract. That's already something that he wouldn't be getting if he wasn't LeBron's son. I will say, though, I don't think it will be a big problem when it comes to Bronny as a player or as a person. Everyone that's been around Bronny loves Bronny. He's a great guy to be around. He's a great teammate. He actually tries to deflect anything that has to do with his dad, and just kind of try to carve his own path, at least publicly, and from what I've seen. So I think it won't be a huge issue, just because I think Bronny is humble enough to not let that become a problem. I think it only becomes a problem if he's really given a ton of opportunities and even playing time when there's other guys that are better than him that are aced out of the rotation, because that might get ugly, especially because Bronny's just not ready to get rotational minutes in the NBA.
Now, for our final closing thought here tonight, want to go around the horn on this question. If you're the Boston Celtics, and given the fact that this draft is on, first round one night, second night, second round, you can kind of afford to take a risk with that 30th overall pick. Obviously, the Celtics don't need any help with their rotation. Last year's first round draft pick, Jordan Welsh, did not even sniff the court this year. Would you give any thought on the idea of drafting Bronny with the last pick of the first round to conclude day one, and then in an effort to kind of see what you can get in return heading into game two of the teams that may want to acquire Bronny, which the Lakers would be one, and potentially even the Suns? Is that straight up crazy? Or if you're Boston, would you do that? Joe?
No, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it. I saw Bill Simmons brought up the same question, saying that they should hold Bronny hostage for Max Christie from the Lakers. Really? Is that you're gonna make that trade? I mean, I don't see Brad Stevens doing that. But could a team do that? I mean, obviously he does hold some trade value if LeBron's like, I want to play with my son, and he's kind of deflecting that now, saying maybe I don't. But I mean, there's too many guys at the end of the first round that I think have a chance to actually be contributors right away, where I wouldn't do it. But who knows, man? I mean, who knows?
We'll have to wait and see. Well, we're going to build up the suspense here, and by waiting to ask our Celtic fan. World B, you go next.
Well, like you said, it's always possible. But I don't think, the Celtics, their roster, while everybody should return and it's young, everything's not guaranteed there. And I don't know if you want to go messing with, as Joe mentioned, you can still get quality at the end of the first round, even though this isn't a star-driven draft. I wouldn't do it. Plus, it's a kind of a crappy thing to do to a kid, just to draft him to spite, his father or his father's team. That's kind of a garbage thing to do, in my opinion. So I don't think the Celtics are that kind of a franchise to do something like that out of spite and twist the needle a little bit. On the other hand, you're drafting a guy to go to the champs. That's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I mean, it is a business after all, so that's why I think it could be in play there. All right, champ, Bruce, give it to us. What do you got?
I don't think Boston is all that concerned about ruining their relationship with Rich Paul, because I don't think they have a relationship with Rich Paul. I don't think Rich Paul has any use for the Celtics. We found that out during the whole Anthony Davis brouhaha a few years ago, where he said Anthony Davis will never play in Boston. However, as Stephen A. Smith might say, Utah's sitting there at 29. Utah's also sitting there at 32. And we know that Danny Ainge has no love whatsoever for the Lakers. So if any team was going to pull that move to try and get Bronny and LeBron James to come play in Salt Lake City, my money would be on Danny Ainge either at the 29 or the 32. But no, Boston's not going to play that game.
All right. Well, lots of fun in store for later on this week with both Wednesday and Thursday having the NBA draft taking place in New York. Joe will be there. Joe, how can our listeners go ahead and see your content that you'll be producing on draft night?
There will be content on all of our platforms at StrictlyBball on Instagram and on TikTok and YouTube. So we are doing some interviews on draft night, and so you can check it out there. And we'll see what we ask them. I don't know. We don't have all of our questions prepared yet, but it should be pretty fun.
Awesome stuff. Well, we again once again want to thank you for joining us here tonight to get us all prepped up for the NBA draft. We couldn't do it without you and your expertise, and appreciate your support of the show.
Thank you, guys. I always have a blast on here. So Ross, thank you. World Be Free, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you, Joe.
And with that will do it for this edition of the 48 Minutes Podcast on Believe, presented by BetOnline. Thanks for tuning in this week, and we'll be back with you next week to be sure you're up to date in 48 on all things around the association. Take care, everyone.